of engaging communities and engaging the provincial government that actually was part of the Liberals' 2007 election platform to create a long-term affordable housing strategy. And maybe we should acknowledge that Brian Teefey, Minister Watson, as Michael Shapcott mentioned, just so you're going to see Brian around the province for these housing consultations, and I can already mention he's been furiously taking notes, and I know he's joining us for the first part of this day, which I think is good. That we're not only going to work with this government, we're going to hold them, as we all know, quite accountable, and I think they look forward to that. Not to speak for Brian. Okay, I'm going to cover just a few nuggets on the housing supply, the state of the stock, as Mike so eloquently introduced us this morning. This is an engaged day. It's a strategy day. Hopefully in the small groups we can get into some of the details. Some of the material, I'm just, again, very much at a high level I'm going to touch on, is taken from the annual report that we produce with the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association. Their executive director, Sharad Kaur, is here as well to work with us today. It's called Where's Home? Because it's often hard to find homes for certain low-income and modest-income households in this province. And a number of the themes I'll touch on probably won't be that much of a surprise to you, but this is information that is come out of the report that we've done that's based on CMHC data, Statistics Canada, and can be very easily verified. Not surprising, housing need is far from being met. And we usually look at long-term trends. Literally in the last 10 years, we have seen very little affordable housing being built. In fact, if you factor in demolition of existing housing, in the last decade, we actually lost 8,500 units. So there's no question, just on the supply level, the need is there. And I think one thing we want to dispel early on, because this was tried by a previous provincial administration, and it did not work. On its own, the market will not produce affordable homes. That experiment was tried, not to get into partisan politics, but from 1995 to 2003, government of a certain stripe, that was their mantra. And as Michael Shapcott mentioned, we actually had existing housing programs since the early 70s, right up until 1995, and they not only ended those programs, which again, not to get into the discussion about it, they also tried to stop any projects that were already on stream from being built. So I think the best analogy I can make in terms of long-term affordable housing, you need an ongoing supply. It's like a swimming pool. You have to constantly replenish it. That's what we had going on. It was never quite sufficient, but every year a certain number of units were coming on stream. Well, we went for a period of 8 or 9 years where literally 1 year, the amount of units that were built for this entire province would have been 2 apartment buildings in downtown Toronto, 770 units in 1997. Whereas previously, we were saying 15 to 20,000 affordable units in the heyday when we had affordable housing programs throughout the 70s, early 1980s, and particularly the boom times in the 1990s. And during those periods, most of the affordable housing is on the rental side. There is some limited affordable ownership housing. We have Joe DeShane Smith here from Home Ownership Alternative. I think people are familiar with Habitat for Humanity. So regardless if it's rental or ownership, the vast majority of units that are affordable for low and modest income households have been through government assisted programs. Developers, and we've got Dave Jackson here from Eastern Ontario. Dave can tell you that regardless of who you are, private, public, non-profit, nobody builds affordable housing without some form of government assistance. Call it what you want, a mortgage subsidy, a capital grant, a housing allowance, tax deferrals. That's just the nature of how these programs work. And when we had programs, about 25% of the units during those years I mentioned were actually rental units. A good percentage of those were affordable because they were through those government programs. That was throughout the 70s, 80s, and right up to the mid-1990s. In our latest report, less than 4% of the units being produced in this province, where we went from 25%, there's a lot of building going on, but that building is for those who can afford it. Less than 4% of the units are actually being built on the rental side. We also know, again, no news to you, it's already been mentioned this morning, the waiting lists are growing. A lot of people don't even bother getting on the lists. I've been given the 2-minute warning. It's 124,000 households at last count, and in some places, Peel, they say it's actually, and I'm not making this up, they actually say it's a 20-year wait to get onto that waiting list. If you go to Social Housing Connections, downtown Toronto, on Elm Street, walk in the front door of that office, I know a lot of you have probably been there, they've got a huge plaque. I mean, they dissuade people from getting on the list. The plaque actually says, it's permanent, by the way, that depending on the size of unit you're looking for, it's an 8 to 10-year wait. So that's some scope of the problem. If you want more information on the data, I've got a couple of display copies that are on the table of information. You can also download it from our website, from UNFA's website. And one of the messages that I think will resonate with hopefully everyone in this room, in that we represent constituencies and communities across this province, and we'll have Brian take this message back to the minister and his colleagues and throughout those regional consultation meetings. You know, the government doesn't have to do this on its own. The most successful housing that has been built in this province, in this country, has been built through community organizations. So we're looking for you to work with us. Those programs had a number of incentives for community organizations, and the energy and the enthusiasm, the capability, the experience that's in this room and elsewhere, we're just waiting to harness it. And a lot of that development capacity has been lost because people who are working in that field, you've got some committed folks like Dave and some others still laboring around the province to build affordable housing. But you know what? They've got to put food on the table as well. And, you know, we're looking for just modest coverage of ensuring that those costs can be met. So that's something that we would hope here throughout these consultations, that the province looks to the community to assist in the solutions. I'll just mention, we all know the existing housing that's out there, both the social housing stock and the private rental housing stock is 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. There was some money in both the provincial and federal budget, part of the stimulus package, to do some repair and rehabilitation of that stock, but obviously a lot more is needed, and certainly the folks from Toronto Community Housing Corporation and other some of the former public housing stock, it's been documented, is in the worst shape. No surprise. What have we got? 30 seconds, Mike? I'm done. Okay. Lastly, I'll just close up. I think that we've got support, obviously, already here in this room. We've got to broaden that support throughout communities and bring in other partners, as the 25 and 5 network well demonstrated in terms of the poverty reduction strategy. And as one speaker already mentioned, housing's not only a right, it makes sense, for all the right reasons, it makes good economic sense. That's why it was in the budget. It's one of the best stimulators you can have, is to both build and maintain the existing housing. It creates jobs, it uses Canadian materials, and it's something that at the end of the day, you've got a long-term asset that we all need. And thank you, and I apologize for that.